was Moshe Feinstein on 12 Adar, and also the Zichos and the Leila Nishmas Shmaryo Yosef Chaim ben Yaakov Yisrael, who's Reb Chaim Kanievsky, whose yard site is on the 15th of Adar. Let us begin today's daf Tezvav. Just quickly recapping what happened yesterday. So yesterday, on the top of the Amud, there was a memra, there was a statement made by Shmuel. Shmuel said as follows. Quickly just read it inside. It's 5 lines from the top. It says, Itmar mochar soda lechavero v'nimtza she'enu shalo. A person sold the field to somebody else. Turns out it wasn't his. So this is the good old expression, he sold him the Brooklyn Bridge. Person sells something that doesn't belong to them. So there was a machlokas between Rav and Shmuel about what happens with the buyer of the Brooklyn Bridge, the buyer of that property, when he goes back to the seller to recoup his money. So we're going to skip to Shmuel Omer. Shmuel says, Ma'os yeshlo. He can obviously go back to the seller. The buyer of this property can go back to the seller and say, you sold me a field that wasn't yours, I'd like to have my money back. That obviously makes sense because you bought something from somebody who had no right to sell it. So therefore, give the money back. The question just is, how about the investment that this person, that this lokach, this buyer has invested into the field? Can he get that money back? So Shmuel says, Ma'os yeshlo, shevach einlo. He cannot get the shevach. And the Gemara explained, the reason why he can't get the money that he invested into it is because it's going to look like ribbis. Because essentially what happened over here is, let's just use names. Ruvain today is going to be our bad guy. I have nothing against anybody whose name is Ruvain, but just for the sake of today, Ruvain's going to be this guy who sells a field that doesn't belong to him. So he's essentially a gazlan. He goes to a field, he sells it, it doesn't belong to him, and now Shimon gives Ruvain money. But between me and you, when Shimon gives Ruvain money for that field, it's a loan. It's not a sale, because Ruvain had no permission, had no ability to sell that field. It doesn't belong to him. So when Shimon gives him money, he's essentially lending him that money for the field. Now when Ruvain's going to return that money to Shimon, he's paying up his loan. Because again, the fact that there was a transaction of some property over here is irrelevant. That property has nothing to do with Ruvain, has nothing to do with Shimon. The whole story was a farce. So therefore, essentially, Ruvain borrowed money from Shimon. Now, if Ruvain's going to pay Shimon back the principal of what he lent him, plus the amount of money that he caused Shimon to invest in the field that doesn't belong to him, it's going to look like ribbis. It's not really ribbis because it's not really a loan, but it's going to look like ribbis because essentially Shimon lent Ruvain, let's just use an argument of $1,000, and he invested another $100 into the field. He's going to be paying back $1,100 for the $1,000 loan that he took, and that will look like ribbis. That's Shmuel's opinion. Now yesterday, the Gemara, again, at the end of yesterday's shir, the Gemara was trying to bring a Aryeh to this. We're going to do it again just because there are multiple ways of explaining this, and if I'm not mistaken, the Rabbi only got through one of them, so therefore we're going to go through this Aryeh again and then be able to go through all the different ways of explaining it. So we'll start today with the words Tashema, which is 2, 4, 6, about 12 lines, 13 lines from the bottom. Tashema, La'achilas Peros Ketzad. When it comes to achilas peros, which literally means a person who ate the fruit, Aryeh, the Gemara explains, Aryeh shegazal sada mechavero, a person stole a field from his friend, v'Aryeh hi yotze mitachas yado, and it's taken away from him. That's what's supposed to happen. He stole the field, now it gets taken away from him. Kishehu gova, when he goes to collect the money, he is an undefined person at this point in time. Gova as a kara minachas mishubadim. He will collect the principal from minachas mishubadim, real property. Uperos, when it comes to collecting the peros, the fruit of the field, gova minachas b'necharin, he collects only from the assets that he has in front of him. So the Gemara says, hey chitami, what's this talking about? Ilema kidikatani, if it is exactly, literally as it's explained, so then that would mean that if a person steals a field, and the field gets taken away from him, when the thief wants to recoup the money, then if he's collecting the principal, he goes to even property that has a lien. If he's collecting the peros, then he goes to only property that's available. The Gemara says, Gazlan miman gavi. Who are you collecting from? You're a Ganav. You're a Goslin. You don't have any right to collect anything. The field got taken away from you. Guess what? That's what's supposed to happen. You're a thief. You steal something. We take it away. Serves you right. You don't have the right to come back and now collect it. So that can't possibly be the case. It can't possibly be talking about the Goslin himself who's going to recoup the money that was taken away from him because he stole it. There would be no logic in that. Elalav. So now what we're forced to say is, it's talking about a person who stole a field from his friend. Now, what did he do after he stole it? He sold it to another person. Now the person who legitimately went and bought the field from the Goslin, again, he doesn't have to know the guy's a Goslin. I put up a sign in front of the house or in front of the field for sale. He went there. He bought the property legitimately, he paid for it. Turns out the field was stolen. So now, before he actually found out that the field that he stole, the field that he bought was a stolen field, he improved the property. So now, clearly, what are we talking about? A regular guy bought a field from a Goslin, and what does it say? It's talking about collecting both the principal and the improvement and the investments into the field. So this is clearly not like Shmuel. Shmuel says when you go to recoup your money, you only get to recoup the principal, but not the investment. But this says clearly that both the principal and the investment can be collected. It's just a matter of where you're able to collect the investment from. Rava explains that this is not going to be a question on Shmuel, because what are we talking about in this case? The person stole the field from his friend, but it was Malaya Peros. The time that he stole it, it was full of fruit. V'ochal esa peros, and he ate up all the fruit. V'chafar baboros sichinum aros. So he did three things over here. First, he stole a field. That's number one. Then he ate lunch. He ate all the fruit that was growing over there. And then he went ahead and destroyed the field. So there's three problems over here. The stolen property, the eaten lunch, and the ruined property. So now, Ban Nigzal, now the guy, the victim of the theft, comes to collect from the Goslin. Ban Nigzal Ligvos Karan, Govin Michas Mishubadim. He could go ahead and collect from the Goslin, even from properties that he subsequently sold. He wants to collect the fruit that were on the trees that were eaten by this thief. That's something he's only allowed to collect from free properties. That means he can go to the properties of the Goslin, but he can't go to properties that were sold. And that's the way the case is going to work out. Now, Rabbi Bar Rav Huna says, could go, for example, Shenatlu Masikin. What happened over here? The thief stole it. But then thieves sometimes hang around other thieves. Perhaps he was part of a gang, and it would make sense. His behavior is in line with such behavior. So he goes ahead, he steals a field, and then other thugs came and said, "Oh, look at that thief, he's got some property. Let's take it from him. He probably owes us money from something else." So the thief has the field stolen by thugs who are taking this field. Now we learned about this Gemara previously, Bava Kama. Top of Tesvav and Aleph. Now the halach is, Ban Nigzal, the legitimate owner of this field, comes. Ligvos Karen, he wants to collect the principal. Where does he collect that from? Govon Michasim Mishubadim. That's where he collects from Michasim Mishubadim. He collects from even properties that were sold. Ban Nigzal, the same person, he comes, Ligvos Peros, he wants the fruit of his field. Govon Michasim Nechorin, he cannot go to fields or to property that was sold. You can only go to property that's available. What's the reason for this? The reason for this is, as we explained many times, the reason why a person can go to a buyer of the property is because there's usually going to be some type of rumors or information that's available about this. If a field is stolen, there's information about it. Now, when it comes to a case like this, for Peiros, there's not going to be that type of call. People won't know about it, so therefore, the buyer of those peiros is not going to be responsible for it. So now the Gemara wants to know, why did Rava and Rabbi Bar Rav Huna have to give two different explanations? Why couldn't they both agree on what the explanation was? In other words, it's not like they're arguing about a particular halacha. They're just both making a different case. So what was the point in the argument? The Gemara says, Rava lo Amar Karaba. Rava doesn't say like Rava lo Amar Karaba bar Rav Huna. Rava does not want to establish the case like Rava bar Rav Huna. Why? Because Aryeh yotza mitachas yado. It says in the case Aryeh yotza mitachas yado. That's an expression we always use to explain that bedina mashma. It was taken away because it was supposed to be taken away. Yotz mitachas yoda means it was confiscated. You know why it was confiscated? Because the person's a thief. He took a field that doesn't belong to him, and the Beis Din said, "Get out. This is not yours." That's what Aryeh yotz mitachas yoda means. Not that thugs came and took it. Why would you establish the case? We're talking about a case where thugs took it away from him. Therefore, he does not want to establish the case that way. Rabbi bar Rav Huna lo Amar Karava. Rabbi bar Rav Huna did not want to establish the case like Rava, where it was talking about where he ruined the field. Because Aryeh yotz mitachas yodo be'ena mashma. It sounds like he's taking the field back in the same way that he took it. Not that he's taking back a field that's all ruined with all kinds of ditches dug into it where it has to be repaired. Now Rav Ashi gives another explanation. Rav Ashi Amar litzdadin katana. Rav Ashi says this entire case was litzdadin. That means that there's two different aspects to the case. When we read it, it was read as one long line, which is if you want to collect the actual principal, you go to Nechas Meshubadim. You want to collect the Peiros, you go to Nechas B'nei Chorin. But Rav Ashi says you have to divide that. Litzdadin katana. Let's divide it. Kegon shegazal sadeh mechavero. Person stole a field from his friend. And that field was Malaya Peros, full of fruit. V'achal asa Peros, he ate up all the fruit. Umachar asa sadeh, and he sold the field. So now, Bolo Keach, Ligvos, Karen, the Lokeach ultimately loses the field. So again, Ruvain is a thief. He steals a field. He sells it to Shimon. Now, in between stealing the field and selling it to Shimon, he also ate up all the fruit. So now, Shimon ultimately buys this field and finds that it gets taken away from him. So the Gemara says, Balokeach, if the Lokeach comes to recoup his money, Ligvos Karen, Govim Nechas Mishubadim. He could collect even from sold properties. But Nigzal, Ligvos Peros, the actual victim of this crime, comes to collect his peiros that were eaten, Gova Nechasa B'nei Chorin, he collects from Nechasa B'nei Chorin, he only collects from what's available. Okay, that's how Rav Ashi explains the case. In other words, it has nothing to do with what Shmuel said, it has nothing to do with recouping the principal and the investment. It's not about that, it's just two different people coming to collect. Now the Gemara says, hold on a second. Bein l'Rava, Bein l'Rabba, whether it's Rava or Rabba, we're talking about a case where the person is coming to recoup the money from the Gazlan. Now, generally speaking, when people steal, they don't write contracts for the theft. They just take it. And therefore, the Gemara says, Bein l'Rava bar Rav Huna, milva al pehu. This ultimately ends up being a case of a verbal loan. There's no contract for it. Umilva al peh eino govim nechas meshubadim. The halacha is, whenever you have a verbal agreement, you can't collect from properties that were sold. Like we explained earlier, the only justification to go to a buyer and to take the property away from him and say, hey, there was a lien on this property, is if the buyer had some way of knowing that there was a lien. Nowadays, we have databases. You could research properties. But back then, the only way to know is if people knew about it. Now, when there's a contract that's written, the contract leaves a paper trail, people find out about it. And therefore, it's the responsibility of the person buying property to be able to research and find out if there's a contract written about it. But when there's a verbal loan, how are you supposed to know about a verbal conversation that took place between two people? There's no way to corroborate it. There's no way to back it up. It's just between two people. Therefore, in those cases, you can't collect from property that was sold after that transaction. In this case, it's talking about theft. Theft, there's no contract that's written. So why are we saying that you can go to Nechas Meshubadim, you can go to property that was sold afterwards? The Gemara says, what we're talking about in this case is Kisha'amad Bedin. He already took him to Beis Din. V'hadar zavin. The guy had a real chutzpah. He was taken to Beis Din. The Beis Din paskin, he has to go ahead and return it. What did he do? Got him for Beis Din and sold the property. So that's why he can go ahead and collect Mechas Mishabadim. The Gemara says, hold on a second. That's what happened. Remember, we're talking about a Gazlan over here who stole a field, ate the fruit, and then sold it. So now if they went to Beis Din already, he probably charged him also for the fruit that he ate. And if you charge him for the fruit that he ate, you should be able to pay back. You should be able to go back to the property that was sold. Ihachi, if we're talking about a case where Beis Din already issued a psak, Peiros nami, you should also be able to collect the value of the fruit that was eaten. The Gemara says, Kisha amar bedin ala karen, v'lo amar bedin ala peiros. He took him to Beis Din for the principle of what was stolen, but not for the fruit that was eaten. The Gemara says, Amai Pascha, why would that happen? Why would you make up such a case? Why would you have a case where he took him to Beis Din for only the principle, not the fruit that he was eating? Gemara says, Stama demilsa kitava inish karna tava baresha. The most important thing, what's the first thing on his mind? It's the value of his property. The property is something which stays forever. He always has the ability to be able to plant it and use it. That's the first thing he's going to take a person to Beis Din for. He'll open up a subsequent case later for the fruit that was stolen, but the first thing on his mind is the Karen, is the principle. Now the Gemara says, V'savar Shmuel lokeach migazlan lesle shvacha. Are you actually telling me that Shmuel's of the opinion that a person buys a field from a thief that he does not have the ability to recoup his investment? That was Shmuel's original statement. Again, in yesterday's Amud, that was the statement. If a person buys a field from a Gazlan, he wants to recoup his money, he gets to recoup the principal, but not the investments. The problem is, says the Gemara, Shmuel himself would tell Rav Chanina bar Shilas, he was a scribe, he was a sofer, he would write contracts. Imlach, you should ask the person, v'kasav and write, shofra, shivcha, uperi. And when a person buys a field, that he should write in the contract that if anything goes wrong, he wants the seller to reimburse him or to replace the sale with shofra, with the best possible property instead, shivcha, the investment that he made into it, uperi, and for the fruits. So Shmuel would constantly tell he would tell the scribe to write that in the contract that it could be replaced. So clearly he was telling him he could recoup the value of the investment. The Gemara goes on to explain this. B'mai, what might that contract be talking about? Let's take the easiest case, which won't pose a problem for Shmuel. Even balchov, if that contract was a balchov of someone who lent money, so then again, what is that talking about? That's talking about a case where a balchov, a person lent money to someone else, he wrote a contract, and he said, if I can't get the money back from you, I'll go to your field. Now, if that's what I was talking about, and he added into the contract that he gets all those things in the field, mi isle peri, it's just not true. A balchov does not get the fruit of the field; he gets just the principle. V'amar Shmuel balchov govas hashevach. A balchov collects the investment, but that's shevach in avol peiros lo. You don't get to eat the fruit of the field. You don't get to collect that. Elalav. So it must be when he was telling the scribe to write all those conditions in. Belokeach migazlan. He must have been talking about a person is buying a field potentially from a thief. Again, you can never really know for sure that when a person's selling you property, the guy's not a thief. You have to plan just in case the person's selling you the Brooklyn Bridge. That's what we do in all contracts. There's tons and tons of language in there to prevent any foreseeable circumstance. So one of the things he would say is, if it turns out that the property that you're selling me is not yours, I want you to be able to replace the field with shofra, a good field, and replace all my investments that I'm going to put into it and all the fruit that I lose. But clearly, Shmuel was telling him to add that into the contract that he could recoup his investment. Amar Rav Yosef, what are we talking about in this case? We're talking about a case where the seller is not going to be replacing it with money When did Shmuel say you don't have to replace the investment? That's when you are reimbursing him for the sale and for the money that he invested. In this case, it's Sheyesh Lo Karka. He's just giving him another piece of Karka. In such a case, there's no problem with Ribbis. Remember, the problem that Shmuel had with reimbursing him for the investment that he made was that, as we explained at the beginning of today's share, is that it looks like a loan because he sold him the Brooklyn Bridge. So how do you justify the monetary transfer? It's a loan. So he's repaying him $1,100 instead of $1,000. But if he's giving him karka, he's giving him land, there's no problem there because there's no monetary transaction, which makes it look like ribbis. Hold on a second. There is an Isra Midrabanan of ribbis to borrow sa b'sa, which is to borrow a specific amount and promise to return that exact amount. Why? Because the value of that product might change in the middle. It's Isra Midrabanan. So the same thing should be true over here. Person has karka, so he's replacing the karka, but ultimately he's giving him more money worth. More money's worth. Amarle hasam halva. You're right. Sa b'sa, the prohibition of borrowing a specific amount and returning a specific amount is relevant when it's really a loan. Hachazvini. Remember, in this case, it looks like ribbis, but ultimately, the truth of the matter is, it's just a sale. Ikeda Amri, others say, Amar of Yosef, Hacha Mayaskina, what's this talking about? What's this talking about? This is not talking about a case where he's just simply paying him back. But it means at the time that the sale happened, at that moment, he already made a kinyan on the potential transfer of this property. So therefore, the kinyan happened all the way back at the beginning before he even found out that the guy was a thief. Are you allowed to do that? Can you create some type of loan where you're going to lend a saw for a saw when you make a kinyan in advance? It's not going to work. It's still a problem. Gemara says the same teretz. You're right. If you're actually talking about a bona fide loan where you're lending something, so you can't just circumvent the isser by saying I'll make the kinyan right now. However, in our case, we don't think the guy's going to have to pay it back. This is just in case it turns out that you're a thief. But he thinks he's actually buying something. It's a sale. Turns out in hindsight, there was no sale, and in hindsight it looked like a loan, but that's not where Chazal made their prohibition. The Gemara goes on. 2 dots. Gufa. We learned, Amar Shmuel, Balchov, a creditor, Govas HaShevach, he's able to collect the Shevach, the improvements to the property. Amar Rava. Rava said I could bring a raya to that. Teda, Shekach Kosevlo, this is what's normally written. When a person sells someone else a field, he writes the following into the document. So it's a very long, flowery line where he says, Ana ikam v'ashfi v'adki v'amrik zvini ilun inun v'amleyan v'shabcheyon. A lot of language where he ultimately tells him that I'm going to take responsibility. Rashi says Ashvi is I'll make it look nice. V'idki, I'm going to tire mikol error. I'm going to cleanse myself from any problem that come up. Inun v'amlein v'shavcheon, and ultimately I take responsibility from everything that you're going to ultimately put into this all investments you make into the property. And then ve'ekim kadamach v'tzavei zavini dinan v'kabal Allahi. The Edom ultimately stand by and they testify that he accepted upon himself all these responsibilities. So clearly all this flowery language that's added into this document is there to be able to protect the investments that he's going to make. So Amarle, Rav Chia bar Avin l'Rava. Rav Chia bar Avin said to Rava, Elomiata, if that's the case, that when it comes to a creditor, he's able to collect the field and the investment because the contract has all that language in it. Elomiata, matana de lo kasev lehachi. A matana, when a person gives someone a field as a matana, ultimately, the creditor, the Bachov, will not be able to take all that property from it, I should say, all that investment from the recipient of the gift, because there's no shtar. People generally don't write a document or a shtar, a contract, on a gift. You give someone a gift, you give them a gift. It's not going to have all this flowery language. The flowery language is only going to be relevant if the person bought the field. If the person buys the field, he wants to protect his purchase. So ultimately, all that is going to be included in the shtar. Now, what's the downside? The downside is that if a creditor comes to take it away, he gets to take away the field plus all the investment. However, there's no contract for a gift. So if a person is gifted a field, then a creditor comes, he can say, listen, I'm sorry that you got this gift. The problem just is the person who gave you the gift really owed me money, therefore I'm taking it away. But he won't be able to take the investment because all this language doesn't exist inside the contract. So it turns out that receiving a gift puts you in a better position than actually paying money to buy a field. So that's what his question is. If that's the case, when it comes to a gift, he doesn't write all this language. He won't be able to collect the investments into the field. Yes, it's true. The Gemara says, is receiving a gift put you into a better place? Is it more advantageous than actually buying something with money? Amarle in Yafa v'Yafa. With regard to this, it is indeed better. Amar of Nachman. Nachman says, Hamas Nisa, the following Mishnah is Mesayeh Lamar Shmuel, is going to back up Shmuel's opinion. V'huna Chavrin, however, Huna, one of his rabbinic colleagues, Mukim Labamili Achrini, he understands this Mishnah differently. Titania, for it says in a Brisa. A person sells a field to his friend, and then it gets taken away from the buyer. So again, the person sold the field. Turns out that he sold on the Brooklyn Bridge. So therefore, he gets the field taken away from him. Now the halacha is kishehu gova, when the buyer is going to collect gova sakarem minachas mishubadim, he collects the principal from even properties that are on lien. The shevach govim nechasim nechorin, the investment into the property, he can't collect from the original person. He only from the buyer. He collects it only from available properties. V'huna chavrin mukim la b'mili achrini. Huna, his colleague, established this to talk about something else. V'lokech migazlan, to talk about a case where he bought it from a gazlan. Natani idach. Let's continue. The Gemara is going to explain this. We learned in another brisa. Hamokar sada l'chaver. A person sells a field to his friend. V'ishbicha, and he improved it. U'bal b'alchov. And the creditor came along, v'tarfa, and he grabbed it away. So again, a person buys a field, invests money into it, and then it gets taken away from a creditor. Kishu gova, when he comes to collect, the Gemara says as follows: Im hashevach yoser alitzia, if the amount of investment or improvement in the field exceeds the amount of investment. So again, if the amount of money that the field is now improved as a result of the work that he put into it is more than the expense that he expended on this field, then notos hashevach mibal karka, he can take the shevach from the owner of the field, v'hayitzia mibal chov, and the investment from the one who owes him from the creditor. V'im hayitzia, if he spent more money on the field, is seir al shavach, more than it actually improved. So let's say he invested $100 into the field, but the improvement was only, $75 or $50. Ein lo ela hotza shir shavach. He's only able to collect the tangible value that it improved. Where does he get that from? Mibalchov, from the Balchov who takes the field away from him. Now, the Gemara is going to explain. V'shmuel, when we're talking about Shmuel, b'may mukim la, how does he understand this case? If we're talking about a case where a person bought the fields from a gazlan, and that's why it's being taken away, because the sale was illegitimate, because there was because the field was stolen. So kasha reisha. The beginning is a problem. Why? Damar Shmuel said, Lokech migazlan less le shvacha. If you buy something from a gazlan, you don't get any shevach. So what's this discussion about collecting shevach from the chasam b'nechorin? You don't get the shevach. You only get the actual money that you paid. Even balchov, if we're talking about a balchov, kasha reisha v'seifa. Both the beginning and the end are problematic. Why damar Shmuel balchov govas hashevach? He's able to collect the shevach. The Gemara says, "Yiboysim b'lokeach migazlan." We could establish this case to be talking about what a person who buys from a thief, and how will we understand it? Again, like we said earlier, that he's not actually collecting cash as a replacement for his bad purchase. He's actually getting replacement karka here. It's talking about a case where he actually made this kinyan in advance, like we said earlier in the top half of today's Amud. If you want, we can explain this. We're talking about b'bachov, by a creditor. V'lo kasha. It's not going to be difficult. We're not going to have the problem of collecting the shevach because kan b'shevach hamagia top of tesvav amud beis hamagia lekasafayim. And kan b'shevach she'en hamagia lekasafayim. Basically, shevach hamagia lekasafayim is Rashi explains karov likatzer. So there are some plants you could do. You could plant them and they are completely unripe. They're not ready. They're just basically at a premature stage. And then you have peros, which are ready to be picked. And then you have hamagia lekasafayim, which means they've started to grow. They're very close to being ready to be ripe, but they're not ripe yet. In that case, says Rashi, El Shadayin tzrichin lekarka, they still need some nutrition from the karka. Havalu keperos gemurin ve'ein ba'chov gova osam b'lo yitzia. That's the case we're talking about, where he can't collect it unless there was investment. Gemara says, but hold on. These things happened all the time. We have stories where Shmuel would collect even from this type of benefit. Gemara says, lo kasha. You have to analyze Shmuel's psak very closely. That was talking about a case where the amount of money that was owed was equal to the land. And vishvacha. In other words, the amount of money that was owed was the masik bay kishir ara vishvacha. The guy who was owed money was owed a lot of money. So therefore, when he was collecting the field and the improvements. Hadalo masik bay el kishir ara. This is talking about a case where he was only owed the amount of the property. The improvements exceed the actual principal of the loan. So the yavle shivche umisalakle, he has to actually give him the benefit, and then once he pays him for the benefit, then he could misalikly, he could tell the guy to get out of the field. Because until then he could say, listen, the guy owes you $1,000. This piece of property is worth $1,000. But the shevach, the fruit is worth more. You don't get that. No one owes you that amount of money. So he has to pay him that amount of money, and then he could tell him to get off the field. The Gemara says, Hani chalaman da amar islei zuzi lokeach lo matzi misalikle. That makes a lot of sense, according to the one who says that if the lokeach has money, he's not able to kick him out of the field. Lo matzi misalikle lebachov shapir. Alman damar ki islei zuzi lokeach matzi misalikle lebachov nemalei ilu haveli zuzi have misakinu mikula ara hashd lasli zuzi haveli garva da'ara ba'ara shir svachai. So I just read a lot of Gemara. I'll explain it outside. There's machlokes. What happens when this Baal Chov comes to the buyer and says to him, listen, I've got some unfortunate news for you. I know you bought this piece of property. I know you worked very hard on it. I know you're very excited about it. The problem is you bought it from a person who owes me money. And this property was on lien, so therefore I'm going to take it away from you. What if that lokeach says, you know what, this property is very dear to me. It's in a location where I like it. I worked very hard on it. How much money does the guy owe you? He owes you $1,000? I'll give you $1,000. Can he do that, or does he not have the right to do that? So the Gemara has two different opinions. That's the man the Amar islei zuzi lokeach lo matzi misalik le'bal chov. That's the case. That's one opinion. That even if you have money, you can't tell the Baal Chov to get lost because ultimately he has a lien on the property. He has rights to the property before you, and therefore, if he wants it, he can take it. The other opinion is, listen, what are you owed? Money. You're only coming here because you're not getting your money, so I'll take care of you by giving you your money. Now the Gemara makes the following calculation. If you're of the opinion that the buyer can get rid of the creditor by saying, I'll pay up the loan, so then why doesn't this guy say to him, listen, if I had money, I would just tell you to get lost, right? Because I'd pay you up. It happens to be, I'm a little disadvantaged, I don't have any money to pay you up. So you're taking my land. But can't we work something out? He says, Hashta, the Leslie Zuzi, now that I don't have any money, Havli Garva Da'ara Ba'ara Shir Svachai. At least leave me a small piece of property. That's the value of the amount that I put into it. In other words, the only thing that I owe you is money. So why is it that because I don't have cash, I should lose more money than that? Leave me a small piece of property, which is the value of the investment that I made. Gemara says, can go into asa potiki, back this money by a certain period of time. And if I don't pay you back, then this specific piece of property is going to be the property used to pay you back. So it's not just that he has assets that you can go collect from, that there's a lien on, but there's a very specific piece of property that was designated as the property that will be used to pay back the loan. In such a case, everybody agrees you can't just buy your way out because you bought a piece of property that essentially belongs to somebody else. The Gemara goes on now and talks about, up until now we talked about a case where a person bought property legitimately. He bought property, someone had a sign, said for sale by owner, he went ahead, bought the piece of property, and then ultimately to his dismay he found out that the property wasn't really legitimately owned by the seller, and therefore he finds himself owning a piece of property that's not his. How about hikir ba she'enu shalom? The buyer knew that the seller was a thief. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes when you talk to somebody and he's about to sell you something, you just know this guy is not legit. So this guy knew that he was buying a piece of property from a thief. Vilakha, he bought it anyway. Amar Rav says, Ma'os yeshlo, shevach einlo. He could still go back and get the money from the seller, from the thief. Shmuel says, Afilu ma'os einlo. You can't even recoup your money. The money is gone. You bought a field that you knew was stolen, then you can't get your money back. The Gemara says, what is the subject of this machlokas? In other words, what's the point that they're arguing about? Rav says, Adam yodea shekarka ein lo, v'gamar v'nasan l'shum pikado. In other words, you have to get into the psychological understanding of this person. What's going on in his mind? Person knows that he's buying a field that is not his. There's a thief. The guy selling it is a thief. So you can't buy something from the thief because the thief doesn't own it. Karka ain't an exelis, $1,000 from me. I'll come get it in 2 months. Gemara says, Savla Makabel. He thinks the guy's not going to take responsibility for it. So why would anybody just voluntarily want to hold on to $1,000 for somebody? It's a big responsibility. So he goes through this shtick. He says, you know what? I'll buy this piece of property from you. He knows that later on the real owner is going to come get it. And he'll say, oh, by the way, the property was taken away because it was stolen. Can I have my $1,000 back? And he'll get his $1,000. Shmuel says, Adam yodeh shekarka ein lo. Everybody understands, again, there's no machlokus about this. Everybody understands you can't buy a piece of property that's stolen. However, v'gamar v'nasan l'shum matana, nevertheless, he was giving this gift of $1,000 to the thief as a gift. So why doesn't he just tell him, here, I'd like to give you a gift of $1,000. What's this whole shtick of buying the field and giving him all the money? Give him $1,000. Gemara says, he knows he's too embarrassed to take money. People don't like to take money from other people. Gemara says, all right, actually, we already had this machlokus in one other place. So if that's really what's going on here, so then why do they have to have this machlokus here? They discussed it somewhere else. Where to Itmar, we learned, a person is mekadesh his sister. Now everybody knows you can't marry your sister. But a person nonetheless goes over to his sister and says, Hareyat mekudesh asli b'tabas zu, or with this money. So Rav Amar Mos Chosrin. Rav says he can eventually get the money back. Shmuel says, Mos Matana, the money is a gift to his sister. Now Rav Amar Mos Chosrin, why does Rav say that he can get the money back from his sister? Because everybody, Adam Yodea Shein Kedushin Tosim Bechoso. Everybody knows you can't marry your sister. V'gamar v'nasan l'shum pikadon. Nevertheless, he gave her the money as just a deposit that she'll hold on to for him. Gemara says, just tell her, listen, my dear sister, can you hold on to this $1,000 from me? I'll be back in a week to collect it. Savar, Gemara says, he doesn't say that. What Kasavar lo makabel minay? She's going to say, no, go to the bank, put it someplace else. Don't ask me to hold on to it for you. So therefore, he pulls the shtick and says, Aryeh, she gets all excited, and she holds on to it, and then later on, he gets it back. Shmuel says, most matana, the money is a gift. Why? Because Adam Yodeh Shein Kedushin Tosim Becho. So the same thing. Everybody knows you can't marry your sister. He's giving this money to her as a gift. Gemara says the same thing. Why doesn't he just be honest with her? Say, listen, my dear sister, I love you so much. You're the best sister in the world. Here's $1,000. Gemara says the same teretz. She's going to be too embarrassed. She doesn't want to accept money from her brother. So now, why do we have to have both these cases? It's exactly the same. Both cases are exactly the same. A person knows the transaction is illegitimate. You can't buy a field that's stolen. You can't be mekadosh your sister. So Rav and Shmuel are having exactly the same machlokas in two different cases. Gemara says tzricha. We have to have both cases. If you only had one, when talking about a field, people don't usually just give $1,000 gift to a random stranger, especially a thief. So therefore, he wanted to repeat it in that case. When it comes to a sister, maybe he'll agree to Shmuel that it's very normal to give your sister a gift, a birthday present. So therefore, he had to say it again to say that no, even when it comes to a sister, I say it's pikadon. If we're only going to say it by the case of the sister, maybe Shmuel is of the opinion that it's going to be a gift when it comes to a sister, by a sister, but not by the thief. Okay, Rav will agree to Rav. Therefore, we have to have both. Now the Gemara says, Bein l'Rav davar pikadon, Bein l'Shmuel davar matana. Whether we're following Rav's opinion or Shmuel's opinion that the way we'll explain this money over here is either as a gift or as a deposit, we have a problem. Because Hai La'ara b'mai kanachis uperos heichi achel. Everybody knows, in other words, both Rav and Shmuel stated very clearly that this guy knows, and he knows very well, that he has no business buying this field. It's stolen. The whole premise is, he knows the field is stolen. Nevertheless, he buys the stolen field. So very nice. It sounds very good and academic to have a discussion about what happens with the money that was transferred for the stolen field. But sir, you're trespassing. Get off the field. Why are you planting there? Why are you eating the fruits? It's not your field. What hectare do you have to go in there before the guy comes to get it back? It's not yours. The Gemara says, Savar, Ana echas la'ara, ve'avid ve'echel begavei kechi devi ka'avid iu. In other words, the field was stolen. So just like the guy who stole it was going in the field and planting in it, so I'm taking his place. In other words, I'm not any worse than the thief. The actual owner's not here. It was stolen. This guy's a squatter. He moved in. He's planting in the field. He's eating the fruits. Why am I any worse than the thief? When the guy comes to get it, I'll get out. When the owner of the field comes, Zuzi Navi will work it out with some money. In other words, he recognizes that it's not his, but he says I'm not any worse than the thief. Now, L'Rav Damar Pikadon, L'Shmuel Damar Matana will deal with the money at a later point in time. Amarava. Now Rava puts like a capstone on this on the last few amudim we were talking about. Helchasa, what's the halacha? Yesh lo mos v'yesh lo shevach. Not like Shmuel. When a person comes to recoup the money, he gets the money that he paid for it, and he gets the investment that he invested into it. Even though he didn't clearly stipulate it. Hikir ba she'ena shalo. In the case where he knew that it wasn't his, v'lakha, he bought it anyway. Mos yesh lo shevach ein lo. He gets his money back. He does not get the investments. And we also paskin achrayus ta'o sofer. This was in yesterday's Gemara. Achrayus, which means if a person forgets, if the sofer does not write in a loan document that you can go ahead and collect from real property, we assume that to be just a simple printing mistake. And bein b'shtari alva, bein b'shtari megachel memkar. Makes no difference whether it's a loan document or a sale. Ba'minei Shmuel mirav. Shmuel asks the following question from Rav. Chazar v'lakcha mi bailam harishonim mahu. Getting back to this case of a thief. Ruvain's the thief. He steals it and then sells it to Shimon. Okay, now, after he sells it to Shimon, now the thief, he's a smart guy. He goes back to the original owner of the field. Let's just call him Yehuda. He says, Yehuda, I'm so sorry. I stole your field from you. I'd like to buy it from you. So Yehuda's like, you know what? Thank you for coming back. I appreciate that you're here to buy it. So he buys it from him. Now the Gazlan goes back to the seller. He goes to Shimon and says, hey, get out of here. This field was stolen. You had no right to buy it. I'm taking it back. Can you do that or not? A really smart Ganav. He stole the field first. He sold it. He knew that the original owner could take it away from Shimon. Now he says, you know what? I'm going to become the original owner. I'm going to go buy it off the original owner, and then I'm going to show up and say, what are you doing here? This field is stolen. You had no right to buy this field, and I'll take it away from him. So now, Arale, ma machar lo rishon l'sheni. When a person sells something to someone else, what do they sell? Kol zechus shetavo liyado. When you sell a field to somebody, you're not just giving him partial rights to it. You're selling everything that you can ultimately have in this field. So that what he's essentially saying is, any rights you'll eventually get to this field, you sold to me. So even if you go buy it, I still get to keep it. My timer. What's the reason for that? Mar Zutra says, people don't want to be called a thief. Ravashi says, people want to be believed. Therefore, people sell the field with all future rights that will come with it. Now, what's the difference whether it's because he doesn't want to be called a thief or because he wants to have his name intact? In other words, he wants to be considered trustworthy. The guy died. If the buyer died. So the person who says doesn't want to be called a thief, well, the guy's dead. So what does he care? He wants to still have his word intact with the Yarshim. Gemara says, what's the difference? The children will still call him a thief. So it makes no difference. It must be talking about the mis-gazlan, that the actual gazlan died, not the lokach. The ones who say the reason why he sells everything, all his future rights, because doesn't want to be called a Gazlan Hamesley. Guy's dead. So he wants to still be trustworthy. Hachanami alfagav demis, even though he's dead, people still want to have a good name after they're gone. So if the Gemara says kakarli bani b'nei gazlana, people are going to call his children, oh, you guys are the son of the Gazlan, the guy who steals fields and sells it. Must be the difference between the two opinions is the yavav matana, where he didn't sell it, but rather he gave it as a gift. People want to give gifts and say he gave a gift, you can actually keep it. It's not like an Indian giver who gives a gift, you have to take it back. Doesn't want to be called a Gazlan. My Gazlim enough. I didn't steal anything from you. I gave you a gift. Maybe it didn't work out, but ultimately you can't call me a thief. We'll stop here. Everyone have a wonderful day.